There was also another study. The government of Canada, its study was based on comparing the new NAFTA with no NAFTA at all, which was not the same as the American study, which compared the old NAFTA and the new NAFTA. I also think, again, I want to put on the record, I think the idea that the American manufacturing and economic community would allow the old NAFTA to collapse without a proper replacement, I think that would be highly unlikely. When I'm down in the U.S. a lot, I've spoken to a lot of congressmen and senators over the past decade, and a lot of free traders in that Congress, and particularly in the Republican Senate. So I think the fact that they would just let NAFTA collapse without a proper replacement, I think is highly unrealistic. In any event, I want to go back to the C.D. Howe assessment, because they compared NAFTA with the old NAFTA. And what they say is, since the higher North American regional value content requirements serve to raise Canadian and Mexican automotive costs more than U.S. costs, since over 80% of U.S. production is destined for its home market and is not affected by CUSMA's rules of origin requirements, U.S. domestic shipments pick up, as well as bilateral exports to Canada and Mexico. But automotive imports from Canada and Mexico decline to help fuel the U.S. gain in the domestic market share. So you agree with this analysis? Look, how much concern do you think this? How much concern do you have that this could occur over the long term of the agreement?
The C.D. Howe Institute asked me to weigh in on their analysis. I didn't support their analysis.
Well, you're being awfully dismissive. I mean, I want some content. I want something specific.
Well, if you want content, you probably should let me finish then. So if we're talking about C.D. Howe's assessment of where these vehicles are going to come and go, one of their premises was automotive production in the U.S., destined for U.S. customer, doesn't have to follow the CUSMA rule. But what I said to C.D. Howe Institute is, I'll say as well to you, automakers do not build two different supply chains. One to hit the American consumer from an American plant, saying, well, we're not going to meet the regional value content, because they lose any advantages of the economies of scale. It doesn't actually work that way. So what C.D. Howe Institute report put out there was an academic hypothetical that didn't reflect how companies like Jennifer's members buy parts or source raw materials or the way we ship. That was the flaw in the study. Simple.
That's good.
Just to follow up on Senator McDonald's comment, what is hypothetical academic is your claim you made to this committee earlier that if we didn't have CUSMA, we wouldn't have NAFTA, and it would be far worse.
No.
So if I can finish. So at the end of the day, I understand that Donald Trump perpetuated his agenda because he's quite a savvy negotiator, that it's this or nothing. But of course, what is a fact is that it's not within the unilateral ability of the president to cancel NAFTA. All of us that are in the business of politics and legislation understand that it's Congress that at the end of the day that can cancel NAFTA. And I think the point that Senator McDonald was trying to make is that it is highly unlikely in a majority Congress of pro-traders right now that NAFTA would have been canceled. So just for the record as well, I'd like to put it on as well, is that the myth that was perpetuated by our negotiating team and our government that somehow Mr. Trump was right, that he could have unilaterally torn away NAFTA, is completely a falsehood. So.
Counter to a lot of analysis in the U.S. as well. There was a great debate on whether if the president could trigger the Article 2205 of the NAFTA, triggering a 6-month withdrawal, does that require for Congress to revisit and rescind the NAFTA legislation or not? I don't think that anybody settled on what the answer there was, and so I think
Mr. Volpe, my comment was not a question; it was a statement. And there are a lot of legal authorities and parliamentarians that will certainly not agree with Donald Trump. Our government chose to agree with him; that's their perspective. Most parliamentarians in the United States did not agree with him. Senator Bovey.
The Minister of Global Affairs, all the negotiating team, I never once heard anybody say with certainty that they agreed with Donald Trump. What they said was,
Congressman.
USTR, I met with congressmen, I met with senators, I met with the USTR,
Mr. Volpe,
I met with the negotiating team, I met with the White House. I met with the White House. I met with them all.
Mr. Volpe, we will dissect this question further with experts and lawyers and parliamentarians. But Senator Bove.
Well, I want to